So I'm going to back up a little bit and address some of the broader issues of AI and network science in particular. What is really going on with AI when we're using it? What is it revealing to us about network science, about the profound transformations in the sciences today, and what that means for architecture specifically? So I'm going to start with a little historical context. I'm going to get into some of what I call the deep net structure of AI, what's going on there, how that relates to cities and to buildings, and then some of the applications to some of our other challenges in our time, and then some surprising implications for aesthetic. And then I'll close with a few brief experiments to see how this applies. So I think we're all aware of really astonishing advances going on these days in our understanding of nature and the cosmos, the advances in the sciences. And although this is a time of profound danger, it's really, I think, a fantastic time to be alive. Everything that we're learning, it's our responsibility then, I think, to apply these lessons to creating a world in which we can survive and even thrive. And the world is already being transformed, of course, by artificial intelligence, but even more profoundly, I think, by what AI reveals to us about natural intelligence and the detailed network structure of nature and human nature and the brain and the nature of cities and buildings, which is what I'll get to. More deeply, we're going to have to understand and exploit the technologies, if you will, of living systems, the ways they can generate their astonishing diversity, resilience, beauty, and sustainability. And these are the revolutionary new insights that are coming out of the sciences today, and from network science in particular. And those living systems include those of the human brain and the way it creates deep networks of knowledge and awareness. Neuroscientists call this the connectome. It's what gives us the picture of the world, all the neurons working together to create this kind of cloud of information and knowledge, the picture that we see providing our intelligence and even our consciousness. And it gives us our ability to tell, to pick out what is going on in the world, the root of the word intelligence. It's the reliable mental model that our brains build as we learn about the world. And that's the basis of human intelligence. And it's the basis of artificial intelligence, the structure known as a neural network that's very much modeled on the human brain. Now, I want to make 2 points about the nature of AI. One is that it has the ability to assemble vast hyperlinked web networks of data or knowledge into a vast model that accurately represents the structure of the world in some way that's of use to us as humans. And secondly, there is the ability to let this structure evolve and grow more intelligent over time, very much like the way a child does. And this is a very powerful principle of self-organization, and that's a fundamental property of biological systems, as I'll explore a little further too. And in the process, the knowledge or the data, these points of information are interconnected to each other in different patterns into vast clusters of web networks. And they grow and they get more and more deeply interconnected. They pair back ever more connections, forming deep networks, or we could call them deep nets for short. And we could contrast those with what you might call shallow nets with few deep connections, maybe because they're too new or they have other problems. And I'll come back to that important point. Now, here's another amazing thing. The natural world is full of these deep net structures, from genetic codes to the structures of proteins to ecosystems and much else in the world, in the universe. And human language also has this deep net structure, as we can see in a beautiful piece of poetry or in the linguistic knowledge represented, say, by an encyclopedia with many deep connections, hyperlinks between the different topics and different bits of knowledge. And as we saw, the brain itself has this deep net structure in the way that it creates deep networks of knowledge and awareness. So here's another amazing and wonderful thing. Cities and the buildings within them also have this deep net structure, or the best ones do at any rate. The spaces and buildings of a city also form a very complex, adaptive, evolutionary web network, self-organizing. And this is this deep net that I referred to at large and small scales. And these structures also learn, in effect, and incorporate intelligence about how to make a successful and desirable place to live. And sure, there are some top-down aspects in structuring these places, but it's not all top-down. There's the bottom-up part is fundamentally important. Now, I know this may seem abstract, so let me give you a concrete example. Here's a fairly ordinary London street around the corner from where I used to live, as it happens, a kind of montage of two images there. And you can see a lot of private rooms back in the buildings, but also more public rooms, the little spaces created by terraces and balconies and the sidewalk frontages of buildings and so on. And these room-like spaces are connected to each other and not connected in other ways. We can see but not hear through the glass, and we can hear but not see through the hedge and so on. And everything is interconnected to the street and to the public realm. And this is a remarkably deep web network of connections, even for this one small section of this street. And I'm showing a simplified model even of the connections. And this kind of place network, if you will, is evolving and self-organizing over time in the literal rooms of a house and the room-like spaces, the urban rooms outside of a house or a building, as people make small adaptations to control their desired levels of contact and privacy. They can do things like close windows and open doors, and over longer periods of time make major remodels or new buildings entirely. And they make changes over time. As you can see, I went back into the same place 5 years later. The image down on the lower part, you can see that there are new businesses and new paint colors, but also new kinds of spaces. They've articulated the terraces up above. They've got stoop in front of the door there. The sidewalk cafe has gone away. I don't know why, maybe the time of year. And the same thing happens at even larger scales over longer spans of time in the great cities of the world like Venice. Here's a drawing by the Italian morphologist Muratori showing how this one section of Venice has transformed over about a century. Really fantastic enrichment, increase of complexity, people making changes, going to the Doge and getting permission and so on, and creating the city that we all know and love today, down to its ornamental details. A similar bottom-up transformation happens in the natural world, where termites and other insects, for example, lay down chemical signals that they then use to build up highly sophisticated structures that can control the temperature of their nests and do other important things, all self-organizing. And this is a phenomenon known as stigmergy, not controlled by a central authority. And we humans do something similar in our urban environments. We lay down information that then shapes further activities and emergent patterns of life. Again, not the only way we structure these, but very important capacity. And as the neuroscientists are finding, beauty, or what we experience as beauty, is also an important form of information, telling us that this is a good place, we will be well here, we can thrive here, and perhaps we'll care more for this beautiful home and sustain it for longer. So I suspect that you can see now that, like brains, cities too can embody a deep form of intelligence, a deep net structure, if you will, and they can evolve and learn to be smarter about how to provide a good place where people can thrive, good in that sense. Now, this understanding of how cities really work is still not well embedded into our, quote, modern systems. And the brilliant journalist Jane Jacobs gave an early account in the early 1960s when she described the organized complexity of cities. And around that same time, the architect and theorist Christopher Alexander, that Nikos mentioned, also pointed out that a city is not a tree. That is, it's not a simple tree-shaped hierarchy, but rather it's an interconnected deep net. And Alexander's insight formed the basis of his pattern language methodology, which turned out to have surprising usefulness of all things in the field of software. And it led to surprising innovations in game design, in Wiki and Wikipedia, in agile methodology, and many other innovations. And you may remember, by the way, I referred to the deep net structure of Wikipedia. So it's not surprising that many large language models use Wiki and Wikipedia. They give a very useful account of the world, and they all exploit this deep net structure. And it seems also there's a similar deep net structure in the way economic expansions occur in cities, very important. So-called knowledge spillovers connect diverse people within the public realm and build economic activity and capacity. And Jane Jacobs wrote about this in detail also, suggesting it was key to the powerful so-called agglomeration benefits of cities. And this deep net structure also seems to be key to the surprising resource efficiencies of cities, especially the more compact ones, because they work not unlike ecologies to maximize outputs while reducing and even regenerating resources as a self-organizing phenomenon. Very important, and a crucial point that Jane Jacobs made near the end of her life when she spoke of the coming age of human capital, as she put it, expanding human development while reducing and renewing natural resources. And I think this is a key feature of the sustainable world that we are going to have to build for the future. Very important lesson for us today. So where does this leave us in thinking about the architecture of the future and the cities of the future? Well, for one thing, I think it tells us to be very skeptical of mechanical, fantasy-based images of yesterday's future that have their roots in the high consumption patterns of the early 20th century, well before our more recent scientific understanding of the deeply interconnected structure of nature and human nature. Yes, there is a place for art and for expression in all of this work, but let's not turn our buildings and our cities into pure art galleries. Let's recognize the natural structure that we must address as responsible professionals. We need to understand the formerly hidden collective intelligence embodied in the great cities of the past, because these approaches have not lived up to the fantasies. In fact, they've left us with a legacy that is, in a word, unsustainable. We're learning, for example, when we look at the historic buildings and structures of the past, and this is AI generated, by the way, but these are real places, that it is not the images of these places that we should merely imitate in some fashion today. Rather, we need to look for the deep knowledge, the deep patterns, the deep nets that they embody for us to regenerate in new contexts, a kind of DNA of place, if you will. And I think this knowledge is very helpful in other ways too. I think we can now see the danger of what I earlier called shallow nets that are in many other realms of our world today that are in effect clogging up the world, making us dangerously unintelligent, artificial stupidity, if you will. They're producing very damaging outcomes and dysfunctions in areas as diverse and seemingly unrelated as destructive social media, smartphones and young people, fake news, political divisiveness, shallow-based, image-based consumerism, the decline of critical institutions, market failures, choking bureaucracy, and unsustainable externality costs. These seem disparate, but I think there is a common root, and it's important for us to understand that. All of these trends imperil our civilization and our future as a species, and all of them could be made much worse by AI, by the way, if we don't learn to manage it wisely. I think we can also see this shallow net phenomenon in the specific dysfunctions of urban settlements. For example, the social isolation and the health impacts that come from sprawling, disconnected, and over-encapsulated urban forms, cities that are too much like trees, so to speak. We cannot sustain the soaring externality costs that must be devoted to reconnecting people through automobiles and other machinery. And we've built a powerful economy around these systems, but it is a depletion economy, not a repletion economy. It is not sustainable, and we're going to have to reform this system. And that's one reason that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and their cousin, the New Urban Agenda, are so focused on this topic of sustainable urbanism, something that is less wasteful, more sustainable, more life-supporting, and by the way, actually more livable and more enjoyable, more pleasurable. And I think this is indeed the path to a new urban renaissance if we so choose. And yet, at the same time, there's an uneasy sense today that the world is getting uglier. We think to ourselves, well, perhaps if we're just dealing with the functional issues, that won't matter. We can have, solar PVs and sustainable technology and so on. But I think looking more deeply, we can see that that view is not consistent with new research from neuroscience and other fields, which suggests that our experience of beauty or ugliness is intimately related to our need to find environments that are healthy and supportive of our own health and well-being. we're learning that these environments often exhibit forms of mathematical symmetry, not just the left and right sort of simplistic idea, but also rotational, translational, scaling or fractal, and compound forms of symmetry that combine these in very powerful ways often. And as Christopher Alexander showed, these symmetries emerge from the natural processes of healthy living growth, including the growth of cities. And when the growth of cities turns malignant, we naturally experience these places as ugly. When we are unable to experience a pleasing symmetry in our environments, say in a prison cell or a bad building, and we punish people by putting them in these places, right? Evidence suggests that we may suffer a kind of symmetry deficit disorder, as Nico and I have written about. So these and other new scientific insights offer us, I think, some very powerful and helpful new tools and strategies to reform our mistakes and to transform our cities and towns into more flourishing, beautiful, sustainable, and just places, ready to play their role in the great transition that must come ahead. It's going to come. The question is, will it be on our terms or on more disagreeable terms? So on that note, let's turn to a couple of quick experiments. I'll close by doing just a few here. First of all, we can use large language models like ChatGPT as actual research tools, as Alexandra suggested. And here I've asked it to outline the structural characteristics of more sustainable urbanism. And you can see some familiar categories: compactness and density, walkability and human scale, and so on. And you can get into the actual citations of these. You can also ask, well, if we're designing for the users, what do the users want? If we're not, maybe, there's a problem of not understanding or having to construe our own values, construe a level theory, as it's referred to. So if we want to know what they think, we can actually do research and say, what does the research say about the general public's aesthetic preference compared to architects say? And here it's giving me the actual research citations. I can pull up the details. I can go farther. I can ask, what are the deeper structural issues, not just the preferences? And ChatGPT can actually drill down and say, yes, there are deeper geometric properties: fractal scaling, symmetry and balanced asymmetry, etc. It's confirming what I was just discussing earlier, a lot of the characteristics that Alexander writes about, in fact, and so on. Quite interesting results, and I think we can learn a lot from these. Again, you can get the actual research citations. You can explore the actual evidence and base your work on that evidence, which I think is very important and very transformative. As Nico said, a new paradigm in many ways. So I can also use a large language model to make a building better, an existing building. So I fed this building in and I said, what can I do to make it more appealing to members of the public? And it gave me specific suggestions: introduce fractal complexity and scale, define clear boundaries and frames, balance symmetry and asymmetry, and so on. And I can go on. I can do really interesting, I can do generative images. And of course, I would strongly caution not to use AI to generate one's actual final design, but to explore, to use it as a design research tool. So here's a prompt I made for a walkable mixed-use city in a desert setting. And in an Arab environment, and quite an interesting result, actually. A lot of really interesting details in this drawing, as you can see. You can use this to mine the patterns and say, well, I really want to include this, I don't want to include that, and so on. And I can continue on. I can go to another iteration, another prompt, and say, well, now show more courtyards and gardens, and I can get that result, and so on. I can keep going. So this is, I think, a useful design process, uncovering the patterns that you might use in your own design, not making an artificial AI design, but giving yourself a kind of pattern language, a literal pattern language, perhaps. Here's an example where we used playing cards in a group setting, a collaborative design process. This was at the World Urban Forum in Cairo. And these are patterns that we developed in a recent book of ours, and Robert Krasser developed these playing cards. So you can use these face-to-face methods, these human methods, and use AI as a supplement, not to replace the human in the driver's seat. We must remain in the driver's seat in this process. And I think we must recognize also the power of these examples from history, these evolved collective intelligence over many centuries, and the lessons that they have, the DNA of place that they can offer us today. I think often of the line by T.S. Eliot, not cease from exploration. And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Maybe that's what we're doing today. That's what I think we'll be doing in the architecture of the future. Thank you.